Good morning, or good noon as it is on the East Coast today. Welcome to our webinar. It is truly a pleasure to host you today. We're talking about defining your ministry's why, and this is where all fundraising begins. Our entire series of webinars, let's see, this is number 2 out of 7. Our objective is to build a community of support around a vision. It's your vision, and that's what we desire to do here at Advocacy. I'd like to introduce myself, and then we'll get on to our speakers very quickly here. Hi, I'm Paul Martin. I'm president of Advocacy Media, and basically Advocacy helps grow funding for Christian broadcasters, Christian schools, Bible colleges, missions agencies, nonprofit organizations that carry the gospel in general. Today we're going to talk about defining your ministry's why. That's where all the fundraising begins. You're going to see how this kind of folds out in a few minutes. I think you'll enjoy it. One thing we'd like you to remember at Advocacy is if your vision for your nonprofit organization is bigger than your budget, please give us a call. Let me introduce our 3 speakers for today, the 3 presenters. The first presenter on our list today is Randy Bronkema, our senior consultant based in Grand Rapids. Randy's long experience in collegiate fundraising, university-level fundraising, running development departments, as well as consulting with high schools, with Christian schools, with Bible colleges, radio stations, churches. Randy has extensive background in development. You're going to hear out of his heart today. In fact, this entire webinar was born out of a real passion Randy has for leadership and answering the question why. He revealed it to us last fall. That's why we're here today. We were moved by it. I think you will be too. I'd also like to introduce to you another senior development consultant here at Advocacy, Jerry Grimes. Jerry also has university-level fundraising experience. Jerry also has raised money at radio stations, Christian radio stations, and has also run a social service nonprofit and raised money for it. So he knows the differences that fall in on all these kinds of nonprofits. I would also like to introduce you to our newest member, Will Stevens. Will has a master's degree from Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, just earned it in Christian stewardship. So we look to Will to make certain that what we do is biblically on base. But I've got to tell you about Will's background before he came to know Christ. Will was on Wall Street working with Morgan Stanley and has this incredible insight into how business people think, how business people feel, but moreover, how the social economy, how the U.S. economy, how the international economy relates with the principles that God has within His Word. You're going to enjoy all 3 of these gentlemen today as they present, but I'd like to introduce to you the moderator today, Jeff Crabtree. Jeff is a client advocate here at Advocacy. His job is to speak with nonprofits every day. He gets a chance to hear the issues that large, medium, and small nonprofits have when they're growing income. So he listens to these questions and concerns, and we felt today would be an ideal opportunity for Jeff to be able to ask some of those questions to our panelists. So without any further ado, Jeff, would you start us off today?
Thank you very much, Paul. I appreciate that. Let me begin with Randy Bronkema. Randy, I've heard you say many times before in front of organizations that we're working with that we're working to help people, but people don't support your ministry so much for what you do, but rather the why you do it. Can you please explain that and the importance of the why?
Absolutely, Jeff. Fact is, I'm asking the question why a lot today because we just heard the weather report here in West Michigan, and we're expecting 20 inches of snow. So I've been asking that question a lot lately. Why? Your why sets you apart and connects people to you on a fundamental level. Everyone is searching for a purpose, a mission. And everybody wants to belong to something. And what connects us is our why, the shared purpose, the shared meaning of our ministries, and even in our personal lives. That is what connects us. But the world doesn't work on a why basis. Let me read you something. The economy is in shambles. There's a total lack of leadership. Hope is at a minimum. The people feel out of control and without a sense of optimism for the future. They lash out at anyone who's different from them. These are the conditions that existed in the 1930s that gave rise to Hitler and an extremely intolerant Nazi Germany. The problem is, I'm not describing pre-war Germany. I'm describing modern-day Greece. See, we begin to start living in a culture that is asking, what are you doing for me? Or how are you going to do it for me? But no one, even our leaders, are not describing the why. And the person who we can model this from would be Martin Luther King. See, here we had this huge rally in Washington. There was no internet. Nobody could go to the internet to find the date and times and when it was going to meet and etc. But yet thousands and thousands of people went, and they paid their own way. Why? Because they believed in what Martin Luther King was talking about. They believed in this why, that little girls, little black girls and little white girls are playing together. I have a dream. And it united people behind that cause. And the world just is not working in that way anymore. So without a why, it's hard to stay on track. Without a why, we begin to start having fear. Fear creeps into our ministries and creeps into our personal lives. The economy's bad, you know, or Obamacare, or whatever the issues are, bringing a certain amount of fear to our ministries. But we as Christians should not be concentrating on these fears. We should be concentrating on our why, our purpose, our mission, and keeping it real in front of us. And a well-positioned why or purpose or mission eliminates fear. Eliminates fear. Next, the mission statement or the why must come off the wall. I collect mission statements. In all of my travels and going into whether it be nonprofit or for-profit organizations, I look at their why statements, their mission statements, their purpose statements. And I try to collect them and write them down and take pictures of them. I'm fascinated with them. And I'm so happy that so many of our organizations do have a mission statement on the wall. But what we're saying here is we're saying, let's get that mission statement off the wall. What do I mean by that? Most of you are going to have meetings this week or next week, whether it be production meetings or development meetings or operational meetings. You're probably going to have a meeting of some kind or leading a meeting of some kind. Let me ask you, take the mission statement and put it on top of the agenda, and all of you read it together before you begin. Then go through your agenda, and when you're done with everything, read the mission statement again and ask everybody in the room, how did we move the mission forward? See, the mission has got to become real, not only in our personal lives, but in our professional lives. It has got to ingrain everything we do and to move us forward. And then making your why come alive. The best way for me to articulate this is to share with you what is my personal why, what is my personal mission statement. And my personal mission statement is to use my passion to help, encourage, and motivate individuals and organizations to find and fulfill their passion for the glory of Jesus Christ. Listen, that's why I get up every day, is to fulfill my purpose, to make it real. I make my decisions based upon my purpose. I base my life around my purpose because I believe before the beginning of time, God has given me a purpose. He planted it in my heart. He planted it in my heart. And he wants to fulfill it. And I believe as leaders of our organizations, he has given us a purpose. And it's time for us to plant it in our hearts again and to make it real, because that's what your donors and friends and board members and everyone is passionate to receive from you. So Jeff, in conclusion here, defining our why and making it come alive.
I really appreciate that, Randy. Thank you so much. And I appreciate the passion that you've got for this. For those of you listening, you may want to make a note of Randy's email or phone number so that you can follow up with questions that you have after we wrap this up today. I'll be directing our next question to Will Stevens. Will, how can a ministry define its why through biblical principles?
Thanks, Jeff. I'm going to drill a little deeper into what Randy started us on, and that Randy emphasized just how important a ministry's mission and purpose is, what he calls our why. And it's often in the work of ministry that we're clearly focused on what we do, that is serving and helping others, and that's great. But we have to be careful to remember why we serve others, and that it's all about serving God first, that ministry is all about Christ working through us. And that has some practical applications. And the bottom line is communicating that why is the key to connecting with people and drawing them and having them support your ministry. So at the most fundamental level, your ministry makes a personal connection with people who share your faith in Christ. So a ministry which reflects its faith in its marketing and its fundraising is really best able to attract and draw people into the ministry community. So when you speak to supporters, it's all about communicating that your ministry community center is Christ himself. The work is important, but the reason for the work, that is Jesus Christ, has to stand by itself. So here's a couple of biblical principles that kind of reflect that in branding your ministry. In the Bible, we have this theme of biblical stewardship, and what it teaches us is that God is the owner of everything. He owns us. He owns our possessions. Let's face it, he owns our ministries. So we are then merely his appointed stewards, and he's appointed us what? To oversee and employ all the resources he gives us. So this is really important in fundraising and in branding your ministry because we're stewards of God's ministry, then we are responsible for the proper care and exercise of the resources God gives us. And while we're responsible to God to be faithful stewards of the ministry, we're also responsible to our donors, because donors in their own way are stewards of the money God allows them to give to your ministry. So we're accountable to God, and we're also accountable to our donors for how we behave as stewards of God's ministry. So you think of these two dimensions. One, we are serving God, and we are serving our community. And Jesus put these two dimensions together when he was asked what the two greatest commandments were. And the first is, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and strength. And secondly, love your neighbor as yourself. Well, here are these two dimensions at work in our ministry. And we love the Lord through ministry by coming to know his character, working in harmony with what God proclaims himself to be, and we draw closer to God by faithfully serving him and being in close relationship with him. Only after we are in relationship with the Lord and come to love the Lord, then can we effectively love our neighbor. And we love our neighbor how? Through our ministry. So it's pretty clear that our relationship with God determines how we best serve the people who are the recipients of our services and ministry. So the bottom line is that we can connect with our brothers and sisters in Christ and attract supporters by being good and faithful stewards. So when we do that, we can expect God to provide for all our needs. Now, he uses people to provide those needs, but it is God who is the provider of all things. So to sum up, Jeff, the biblical principles that we live and work by are at the core of every great ministry and really at the core of every successful fundraising effort.
I'm sorry, I was on mute there. Those are really great, Will. I want to say that I really appreciate how you've taken that thing that we love so much, which is our love for Christ, and blended that into what we're supposed to be doing as a ministry. Really great God-honoring lessons. And by the way, don't forget to make a note of Will's phone number and email so you can connect with him after today's webinar. Randy, let me come back to you again. Another thing that just keeps coming up. What is the important role that values play in a ministry's why, and how do we go about adopting them?
Well, Jeff, I really kind of want to expound on what Will was talking about in relationships to stewardship, because a ministry's why, it has to be grounded in values, which are clearly formed and presented. and they must be accepted and adopted by your entire ministry community. Job 34, 3 and 4 says this: we can choose the sounds we want to listen to, and we can choose the taste we want in food, and we should choose to follow what is right. But first of all, we must define among ourselves what is good. See, less than 2% of individuals have clearly defined governing values. Now, here's an interesting statistic. Less than 10% of organizations have clearly defined governing values. Now you wonder why some of the organizations that we have read about and that we have watched on TV that have went the wrong way, why they went the wrong way. See, it's governing values that help us to make those right decisions, that motivate us, and that keep us centered on what is important. Governing values for our ministry are so important. Now, how your ministry can develop these values? Well, you can develop them through life, failures and successes. Definitely through this concept that Will talked about in terms of biblical teaching, stewardship, by watching other leaders and organizations that you admire, and also watching other organizations and leaders you do not admire. You can learn a lot from them in terms of your values. Even the ministry of Apostle Paul was value-driven. Let me share with you some of Paul's values. Not taking financial support from churches he was starting. Not working with where someone had already labored to start a church. Always visiting the synagogue first when arriving in an area. Traveling in the company of a team. Paul did that on his missionary journeys. And not insisting upon a Jewish lifestyle as he visited diverse cultures and people. So Paul himself was governing his ministry through a series of values. Values drive action. The best way to describe that is, let me share with you again, I shared with you my why statement or mission statement. I have governing values. And one of my governing values is I love my family. Notice I didn't put a noun, family. I like values to be proactive statements, Jeff. I think they're so important. So one of my values is I love my family, and I try to read my values and clarifying statements to those values every day. Now, why do I try to read those? Well, I travel a lot. I'm working with clients such as yourself, and I'm traveling. I'm in hotels. I'm tired, and I'm vulnerable. I'm vulnerable. And if I'm not reading my values, and I'm not in getting them ingrained in me, I'm going to make wrong decisions. I'm going to make wrong decisions. But because I read that value, I love my family, and it keeps imprinting in my mind time and time again, when those temptations arise, hopefully I'm able to make the right decisions because of those values. And values also inform your ministry's decisions and actions. You know, so you want to work with Randy Bronkema. Well, what are my values? Shouldn't you know that? If you work with Will Stevens or Jerry Grimes, ask them their values. Because if you and I have the same type of governing values, guess what? The odds are that we're going to have a great working relationship, aren't we? Don't be afraid to ask those questions of other companies to help you make good decisions. When you go to hire somebody, do you have shared values? What are their values? See, values, again, are intricately a part of how we move our why forward. And so we must understand our core governing values, list them, have them on everybody's desk to making sure we're making decisions based upon these core values. So, Jeff, core values are integral, are so important to what we do as a ministry.
Randy, I was surprised to hear that only 10% of the ministries have these written values in front of them. That's kind of sad. And thank you so much for sharing the importance not only of those values from an organization standpoint, but the personal ones, because that's where we're living and have to function so much. Jerry, ministry leaders have asked me a lot how their mission statements are supposed to mesh with the type of why that Randy and Will have already shared about. Can you give us some practical advice on how a ministry can actually live out the mission that God has called it to?
Sure, because I think that's so important, don't you, Jeff? I think that if you just keep your mission statement up on the wall like Randy was talking about, it's not going to do a heck of a lot of good. It's not going to really go anywhere. You're not going to have traction. So I think that one of the things that you can do is to take the three-bucket approach, the three-bucket approach. And I want to give you an idea of how that would work in a real ministry context. So let's imagine that you run a ministry serving the homeless in your community. Maybe it's one of the many fine gospel missions that we have across this country. Almost every community has one. Well, you would probably have a nice mission statement. It's probably going to be kind of broad, though. It may not cover everything that you do as an organization like that. For a ministry serving the homeless may do quite a lot of different things, really, when you sit down and think about it. They may have a shelter where people can stay overnight, sort of an emergency shelter type thing. They may have a meal service where people can be fed each day. They could maybe run some classes and have mentoring to help people who are disadvantaged or homeless get back on their feet. They could have a clothing bank. They could have any number of direct outreach ministries to the homeless. But what about this? Couldn't they also have a volunteer center where people learn to work with the homeless, and maybe even a community outreach program to train people in churches on how to help people who are disadvantaged and how to prevent people from losing their homes and that kind of thing? Wouldn't they also maybe have some sort of advocacy for homelessness and issues in their community before, say, their city council or their state government or the media, that kind of thing? How is one mission statement going to really cover all of that? It's not. And so telling people your mission statement as it's written isn't going to get the job done as far as communicating. That's where the three buckets come in. These buckets are categories. They're containers that you can put every activity that you do inside of so that you can describe your mission statement after you read it to them or tell it to them, recite it from your heart. You can then say, and here's how we do that. And then it's bucket number 1, bucket number 2, bucket number 3. So your little speech that you might make, your little elevator speech, if you will, could be, well, we are an organization committed to serving the homeless in Allen County, Indiana, for example. And we do that with direct aid, career training, and community outreach. Do you hear the three buckets? Direct aid, career training, and community outreach. Everything that the organization does fits in those broad categories. There's only 3 of them because as a writer, I can tell you the rule of 3. People have a hard time remembering 1 and 2 things and much more difficult time remembering 4, 5, 6, and 7 things, but our brains are sort of hardwired to remember this, that, and the other thing, 3 things. So there are 3 buckets. The point is everything you do as an organization should fit into one of these 3 categories, and figuring this out allows you to quickly describe who you are and what you do. And so that's a little tip on the 3 buckets. And then I would also say another thing you can do is to develop a storytelling culture. A lot of the good work that your organization is doing that illustrates and celebrates what God is doing through you and in your midst is being lost because people are not capturing stories. You need to stop and think about the volunteers that come in contact with your clients, the people that you serve. You need to think about the people that you serve themselves, whether they're listeners or people that are benefiting from your outreach in some way, whatever ministry you're in. You need to think about board members and friends and community organizations who benefit from what you do. Are they being asked on a regular basis to share how they've been impacted? Do you have a story form on your website? Do you regularly train your staff to capture these stories? These kinds of stories are gold in the fundraising world because they celebrate what the Lord is doing through your ministry, giving him glory, and that will turn into blessings for your organization and will inspire people to continue to give to you. So develop a storytelling culture. And this extends to every team member at every level. the part-time volunteer who comes in a few hours every month, all the way up to the board members, all of them should be engaged in capturing the essence of what your organization does, real proof and metrics and measures of what God is doing in your midst, so that you can continue to live out your mission and demonstrate that you're making an impact. And I think, Jeff, that's really a solid approach to making sure that we're living it out and living out our whys the way that we should be.
No, Jerry, I love those practical examples and stories. I have to confess that I was scribbling like crazy to get a few of those practical action steps written down. And for anybody else who was like me trying to make sure that they hadn't missed something, if you did and want to get a hold of Jerry, his email and phone number is still up there on the screen. Randy, let me come back to you. We've heard Jerry and how we put life into our mission. But I know I've heard you share many times in front of the folks that we work with that a ministry also needs to have a vibrant vision to engage donors deeply. What do you mean by vision, and how can a ministry define its why through that vision?
Thanks, Jeff. It's a great question. I want to start out here by saying great leadership stays focused on the vision. I think what is happening in our culture, in our Christian culture, is we have become a generation of busy people. You know what I mean? I mean, we're busy. And you know something, we are busy. We're working long hours. We're doing a lot of things. But I do think that Satan has got us working on some of the wrong things. And I think leadership, and if you're a leader in this room, in fact, I believe anybody who's been called by Christ is a leader, is an influencer. That's what leadership is. But if you're in charge of your organization, you're in that leadership. Let me make a quote to you and explain it. Great leaders build great people toward a great vision. See, as leaders, we need to stay focused on the vision. We will give an account of that vision in front of a holy God. We will. And we need to take it seriously. Therefore, we need to be developing people and pushing the vision forward. It is the most important activity you have as a leader. Because in tough times, vision is the first casualty. In my travels and meeting with so many wonderful organizations and talking about these issues, there's a lot of excuses out there. But trying to pay the bills, you know, Randy, we're trying to pay the bills. But as Jerry was talking about, when you really drill down, so many of you have so many wonderful stories. You're doing great things. And the vision shouldn't be the casualty in tough times. It should be accelerated. I serve a God who's in charge of economies. And we need to have that confidence as we move forward. So in developing your ministry's vision, what would your friends and listeners and donors or underwriters be saying about you in the future? What would you want them to say about you? What will excite you and others? I mean, want you to something to get you up tomorrow morning, no matter what the weather is. What will your mission or your why look like 1, 2, 3, 4 years down the road? And what are your deepest ministry passions? These are the things that will help you to start defining your vision and beginning to write it down. But I want to conclude here on this segment by saying this: beware of a strategic plan without a vision. Let me explain that real quickly. In the 90s, in the decade of the 90s, and then the decade of the 2000s, strategic plans were huge. Everybody was, we as consultants were talking about strategic plans and developing strategic plans. And strategic plans are good, not putting them down. The problem is as you go in different ministries around this country and you look at the leader's bookshelf, you'll see a thing marked strategic plan, and you pull it off, and you can literally kind of blow the dust off from it. Because the strategic plan has gotten so complicated, because it deals with goals and action steps and master tasks and tasks, and it goes on for pages and pages and pages. See, A visionary statement is those 5 to 7 things you want to accomplish. And then your job as leaders is to make sure you're accomplishing them. And let me just say this. One of the responsibilities that you have a board is to help you fulfill that vision, not to help you in terms of what copier you should be buying. Vision is the most important thing that a board should be looking at and helping you accomplish. So leadership is key here because you need to stay focused on your vision. Thanks, Jeff.
Those are some excellent questions, Randy, that we should also always be asking ourselves to clarify the difference between our mission and our vision. And I'm still stuck on that quote you said about great leaders building great people focused on a great vision. Thank you again, Randy.
You're welcome.
Jerry, okay, our organization, let's say we've made the mission a dynamic part of our culture, and we've cast a vibrant vision, but we need to share them both outside our own walls, don't we? How can
Absolutely.
a ministry effectively communicate its why to existing donors and prospective supporters?
Well, it's really important that you sit down with your vision that you want to achieve, your mission, the things that you do every day, and what you're all about, and those 3 buckets that I talked about earlier, and some of these great stories that illustrate just the impact that you're having on your community and the people that you serve. And you craft a plan for your messaging. Because the funny thing about messaging is if you're not intentional in communicating what you really, really want to say, you'll communicate other things that are much less important. And communication will happen. You just won't be driving it. It'll be like a runaway train, and you don't want to lose control of it, especially in this day and age where volunteers, constituents, donors, friends of your organization are capable of communicating on your behalf in the social media space. So you want to control the environment of that space by seeding it with good stories of information that really does state what God is doing to your organization, and you want to have an influence on that messaging. And the best way to do that is a really solid plan. I sit down with organizations and help them craft communication plans, messaging plans. They encompass donor communications. They encompass social media, what we say on our website. I work with many Christian radio stations, so it certainly encompasses what they say about themselves on their air that relates to donors and to friends of the ministry, inviting people to participate with them. And it's so important that these plans are developed. They run usually over a 12-month period, and they're refreshed and refined throughout the year with certain objectives for each one of those spaces. We may say, look, we're gonna go on our website and put up this kind of a story 2 or 3 times a month. We're going to put in social media on Facebook. We're going to put on these kinds of pictures and images because those are so important. And Pinterest is starting to take shape in this area too, where visuals are so important. So planning out your messaging is really important. And as you do that, you're going to notice something. There's going to be a need for colors and images that tell your story, for your logo. And before you get started, you're going to need to sit down and check your brand. Make sure that your logo is up to snuff. Does it communicate who you really are? Are you going to be consistent in using colors and textures and images that convey what your ministry does and support you? A brand is an idea, and it's the impression that people have when they walk away from experiencing some kind of an interaction with you. If they come to your website or they come to an event that you host, what impression of you do they walk away with in their minds and in their hearts? That is what a brand essentially is. And so you want to take charge of the impression that you're leaving with people and make sure it's a good one and make sure it fits your mission and your vision. So check your brand. As you develop this plan too, you're going to need to automate it a little bit, and you're going to promote consistency. One of the ways you can do that is to build a story image bank. And this would be where you would put some really good quotes and illustrations and examples of how God has worked in your midst. into Word documents or put them on your server so that a volunteer or a web person or somebody else could access those and use them to put content up on your website or in social media space that's consistent. Same thing with pictures. These are great pictures that can really illustrate what God is doing in your ministry. But putting them into a bank like this where people can access them gives them approved content to put up that keeps things fresh and alive. So when they're writing any kind of a story or putting up some kind of an image, they have something to draw from. And the last thing I want to share with you, and I want to spend just a little bit, this goes back to kind of like the 3 buckets technique that I talked about earlier. This is another tool you can put in your toolbox. And I could spend probably a whole nother webinar on this, and I might be doing that at some point in the future. And it's the essential story technique. Let me explain this to you, the essential story technique. Here's how it works. You go through all of the examples of how God has worked in your midst. You look at all of the case studies, all of the situations where God has really made a difference in someone's life because your organization exists. And you note something about them. You note that they sort of have a common theme, or they kind of have an idea that behind them that, yeah, this is the kind of person who benefits from our ministry the most. And then you begin to develop sort of a platform or a template. I'm a little bit hesitant to use that word because I don't want it to sound like it's cookie cutter. Each story that you're going to share is going to be unique, but they're going to be laid out in classic storytelling form. You're going to start with the situation before God brought you that individual to work with. What was their life like? How bad were things? What were some of the things they struggled with? How was their life before? And then the moment of interaction. How did they find your organization? How did they connect with you? How did that come about? How did God lead them to you? How did they put you together? And then the transformation. What did your organization do in order to impact their life, change their life, make life better? And then the next part, the after effects or the benefits. How is their life now? How did they dramatically transform into who they are now? And how does that contrast with the very first part? So you see how that's laid out into a before, a middle, and an end? That's an essential story technique. And what you want to do is sit down with your team and lay out what your essential story template might be like. And then when they meet someone who's gone through a transformation, they benefited from your organization, you are then able to put those facts into that order, and you can consistently tell a story about how God has used your ministry, and it will be powerful and meaningful every single time, because the details that somebody listening to you needs to have to really understand, they're going to all be there. So that's really all an essential story is laying out the details. So then you look for those stories and you build them. You build a library of case studies and you put them on your website, and you're improving your consistency and sharing your why more passionately. Does that make sense, Jeff?
It does, Jerry. And in fact, I've heard you say before that relationships is the real key. We're not trying to manipulate people. So your essential story technique is really our way to deepen that relationship, isn't it?
That's exactly right. Fundraising is all 80 to 90% relationship building and only 10 to 20% asking. And a lot of times people get really confused about some of the things we're sharing, that they feel like they can be manipulative. And they're only manipulative if you're sharing them, if you're giving information to get something back in a very awkward way. Yeah, that's manipulation. But this is celebrating what God is doing. And we're hoping that God will inspire people. But if they don't end up giving and they don't end up being inspired, then there may be some other place for them in the kingdom of God. And we just simply bless them and release them. We don't believe in arm twisting, cajoling, manipulation. Those are techniques of the world. They're not our techniques.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jerry, for that communications advice. Randy, we've discussed biblical principles of our why and how to integrate them with our values, with our mission, and even our vision, and then how to communicate all that really well. In tying all these concepts and action points together, give us one more 30,000-foot view. How does a compelling why change a ministry for the better?
There are 3 reasons that a why can change your ministry for the better. The first one is unity. Let me talk just briefly about this. A few years ago, when I was with Cornerstone University, I was invited to an economic club, and I sat by a very attractive young lady who happened to be the executive director of the Planned Parenthood. And in the process of our conversation together, she looked at me and said, "You're an evangelical Christian, aren't you?" And "Certainly, Jeff." I said, "Yes, I am."
Mm-hmm.
And she said, "I'm not afraid of you guys." And I said, "What do you mean by that?" And she said, "You Christians get all bent out of shape for maybe 4 weeks to 6 weeks, and then you forget about it, and then you go away. I'm in it for the long haul." And what she said to me, Jeff, shook me, because she was right. We Christians are not united at all. Are you united in your ministry's why? Do all of you believe in it? Do you live it? Is it off the wall? Are people experiencing it? See, we can't even get two pastors within 2 blocks of each other to get together and pray. And I think it's time for all of us as ministry leaders to rally and be united behind our why, and encourage other ministries to be united around their why, and begin to start sharing those stories. As Jerry so eloquently put it, we have got to come together. And we can do that by being an example of how we're united behind our why. The second thing that a why can change our ministry for the better is it can give us passion. All of us at Advocacy are united behind our why. Working with Jerry Grimes and Will Stevens and Paul Martin and Jeff Crabtree, it's been a great experience, because I wish at some point we could invite you all to be a part of our staff meetings, because they're fun. They're engaging. We challenge each other. We even argue a little bit. But we're all passionate about what we do. That's what's so exciting to be around these guys, is because we really want to serve. See, if we don't have passions about what we do, then why do we do it? Because people are buying into that why, everyone. They're buying into it. They're hungry for it. They want it. But we are not sharing it. And so we've got to unite ourselves, and we've got to be passionate again about what we're doing and why we do it. And the third thing is it gives us inspiration. We live in a world that desperately needs inspiration. People are hungry for it. Your staff wants to be inspired. Your staff wants to be inspired. What better way to inspire your staff with the why that you have, the mission that you have? Inspiration. Leadership around you needs to touch everyone, to inspire people. One of your primary jobs as a leader is inspiration, not negativity. Did you hear me? Certainly there are times we have to correct people, but people are looking for inspiration. They're beat up from every angle. They're afraid from every angle. And we as Christian leaders need to be inspiring them. We need to be inspiring our supporters, our donors, our champions of the ministry, inspiring them for what your ministry is doing, to share that information. Get out of our offices and get out there in the community and inspire people, and to inspire our board. And the board needs to understand that they too are to inspire their communities with the mission that you all are working so diligently on. So, our compelling why can change our ministry through the better. It can unite us. It can give us passion again. And it can give us inspiration. And Jeff, this is what is so desperately needed, is those three things back off the wall and in our hearts.
I love it. Thank you so much, Randy, for tying that together. Paul, let me turn this back over to you.
Thank you for your attention during the time here, and I want to appreciate Randy and Jerry and Will and Jeff for bringing some amazing content today. I know there's so much more I want to ask about each one of those questions that they laid out. We're going to have some of these drill a little deeper in the weeks ahead. We have just completed the Defining Your Ministries Why, where all fundraising begins. Next week, we'll be talking about, this will be next Thursday at noon Eastern, transforming your ministry into a community of ongoing support. You're really going to like this. This will be putting feet on a lot of the material that you've seen today. And then you'll see the rest of those there. I do want to invite you to contact Will, Jerry, Randy, or Jeff with any questions you might have that you would like to ask a few more questions about what is going on there. The other thing that you may find also interesting too is that, my goodness, how did this happen? One of the other things that we have are blogs and other insights on the web. We would very much like to make certain that you have that opportunity to see those. So if you would, there we go. If you would, please check out advocacy.com and take a look at all the different opportunities that we have out there, the blogs from all the people. You see them on the screen now. And it's absolutely fantastic as far as anything. In fact, one of the things I do is whenever I look for a subject that I'm working on right then, I actually put the subject in the search box and see what we have inside there. It's quite a knowledge base. Folks, thank you